Then there is the uh, very, very interesting separate representation of Voters Act, which removed black, colored, and Indian South Africans from the voters' common roll in 1951. And it created a separate electoral system that caused different races of people to vote for their own representation within the government of South Africa, and they could vote also for their own governing bodies that governed over them specifically. Now, if the ANC would do this today, then it would basically mean that white people would elect their own government within the government of South Africa, and that might also not be the it would also not be the worst thing for what would be happening here.
The apartheid revisionist also likes to reframe the voting system, the proportional voting representative system of South Africa under the apartheid system. They like to phrase it as though it wasn't such a big deal and that people who weren't white actually had a significant say under the apartheid system and what would happen in this country. The voting system under apartheid was not a single static set of rules, but actually what it was a series of legislative maneuvers designed to consolidate and maintain white minority rule. It evolved from a flawed Westminster model into a complex, racially tiered system that basically stripped the majority of the population of their South African citizenship. The 1948 turning point. Before apartheid was formally codified, South Africa used the first past the post system. In the 1948 general election, the National Party, the NP, won the majority of the seats in parliament despite receiving only 37.7% of the total vote. Their opponents, the United Party, won nearly 50% of the vote but lost the election. This happened because the NP's support was concentrated in rural constituencies that were loaded, meaning they need fewer votes per seat, while opposition support was diluted in large urban constituencies where you had more people but only needed a particular number for seats. The result is that this technical victory allowed the minority of the white electorate to implement the apartheid system for the next 46 years. The systematic disenfranchisement. Initially, a small number of black and colored men in the Cape Province held the right to vote on a common roll based on property and literacy qualifications. This was called the Cape Qualified Franchise. And this actually wasn't too different from what many countries around the world did voting wise. The NP government dismantled this through legal and constitutional manipulation. In 1951, the government introduced a separate representation of Voters Act to remove colored voters from the common roll. This led to a major constitutional battle, often referred to as Harris versus Donges. When the courts initially blocked the law, the government packed the Senate with NP supporters and increased the number of judges in the appellate division to ensure the law would eventually pass. By 1956, all non-white voters were removed from the common roll, making the South African Parliament an exclusively white elected body. So now you look at the Bantustan voting system. For black Africans, the government implemented a policy of grand apartheid under the promotion of Bantu Self-Government Act in 1959, so-called. Black South Africans were stripped of their South African citizenship and reassigned as citizens of 10 ethnic homelands or Bantustans, such as the Transkei or Bophuthatswana. The state argued that black people did not need to vote in white South Africa because they could just vote for their own governments in their homelands. Now remember that these governments in the homelands were largely puppet regimes founded and controlled by Pretoria. So black people could never actually vote against the government of Pretoria. You could never vote them out. While that vote meant nothing to the broad picture of who governs the country actually. The tricameral parliament of 1984. In an attempt to reform the system and co-opt other minority groups, a new constitution was introduced in 1984. It created a three-chamber legislation. The House of Assembly, which was white people only, had 178 seats. The House of Representatives, which was colored people only, had 85 seats. And the House of Delegates, which was Indians, had 45 seats.
I said, hold up, wait a minute, something ain't right.
Perhaps the apartheid revisionists can see that there was a certain group left out here. This was, of course, a sham.
You're a demon.
It excluded the black people, the majority, and they remained entirely excluded from the system. And that's exactly what they needed to do if they needed to hold on to power as a white minority. Because if you include them, then you're going to be voted out, which is exactly what happened 10 years later in 94, right? The setting up of this sham was a catalyst for the township uprisings of the 1980s. Willem Petzer likes to try and argue that the system gave black people a way to influence the government.
Stop it. Get some help.
I know he cannot be that ignorant, because the ratio was 4-1. The number of seats was fixed at this ratio that ensured that the White House, the White Assembly, could always outvote the other two combined on general affairs such as defense, finance, and foreign policy. And then you add to that the President's Council, which was a council to settle disagreements between the houses, which was also weighed heavily in favor of the White House of Assembly. So then when you get the transition in 1994, you see the apartheid voting system come to an end and the interim constitution of 1993 come into effect. And then in 1994, South Africa held its first democratic election based on universal adult suffrage, where every citizen over the age of 18, regardless of race, could vote on a single common roll. You don't have to be a great genius to see that those are two very different systems. Thank you for listening. If you dare, buy us a coffee. The link is in the description.
Why are you running? Why are you running?